This is Ogilvy On Live, where Ogilvy experts and guest panelists bring you the thinking behind the impact. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the discussion.
I think the statement that is most true when we finish this report, and one that I think anyone working in the loyalty space with any brand understands, that consumers, you have to earn that loyalty. It can't be bought. Buying loyalty means that you'll be racing towards the bottom and commoditizing your products and your brand. So most brands that are in this space, or many at least, confuse loyalty with repeat transaction, relying heavily on incentives and discounts and convenience as a measure of the success. But through the research and through experience, we know that consumer brand loyalty is much more profound. It really arises from a meaningful relationship built on emotional resonance, a set of shared values, and an authentic connection. In a way, it is somewhat similar to relationships you have with people. When we started to look at how we've been applying the basics of loyalty, we started to realize that we had a bit of a blueprint that had started almost 2 decades ago with the 4 bonds of loyalty. And these are psychological ties that we had previously explored and applied through research that explains how loyalty develops between a customer and its brands. The new research that we've conducted has now given us a further dimension to how brands and consumers connect, and it's through these motivators that shape that customer commitment and deepen the engagement over long periods of time. So if you notice in the bonds, we really talked about the emotional, social, structural, and financial connections, psychological connections that a brand would create to engage with you. Primarily brands that had formal programs of points and tiers, they tended to really focus primarily on the structural financial. So that's the majority of the programs that most consumers are familiar with. They'll immediately assume they sit in those 2 categories. Currently, as we start to move forward and you start to see what actually keeps a consumer coming and engaging deeper with these 4 bonds, is that this framework, even though they seem distinct, they're also deeply interconnected. The 4 bonds create this foundation for loyalty, while their 4 dimensions determine whether that loyalty is sustainable and emotionally meaningful. And together they make a system, almost like a standard model that describes relationships and prescribes how loyalty can be designed. When we start to look at the study itself and started to design what should the study really try to focus on, we realized that it needed to be global. So we needed to have a sense of scale that was that gave us permission to understand if these dimensions were truly impactful across all our clients. So we looked over a survey of over 3,500 adults in 7 countries. The qualification that we used was they had to have at least one loved brand, one brand that they thought was above all else, the brand that they couldn't live without. And they were asked to keep that brand in mind when they were responding to the questionnaire. So we asked respondents your typical demographic information so that we can at least understand demographically the segmentation. But then when we went further and assessed the respondents on behavioral science factors of conscientiousness, openness to experience, and regulatory factors to investigate these associations of the psychological drivers with the dimensions of loyalty. And so in the report, when you download it, you will see we've included very extensive reporting on the data and how the data was actually came to bear both demographically and geographically. I'm just going to give you some very quick highlights. The report is extensive, and so we definitely don't have time today to go through all the nuances, but I did want to highlight a few variations that we thought were interesting. So when you look at national variations, we identified slight different levels of agreement between the 4 dimensions of loyalty. For example, Brazil and India consistently show higher agreements with all 4 dimensions, while Germany and the UK tend to have lower agreement on all four. This indicates that there are cultural values and societal norms that play a significant role in how consumers perceive and experience loyalty. In cultural reflections versus leadership, for example, most consumers prefer brands to reflect culture rather than lead it. And I think in today's, uh, I don't know, today's view of where we are with geopolitical things as they are, I think this is good news because brands are tentative to go beyond just reflecting it. However, this preference varies across countries and generations. It is important to note that younger consumers in some regions are very open for brands to take a leading role in shaping that culture. Places like Brazil and India, their greater openness to brands that actively reflect or even lead cultural narratives, while countries like Germany and the UK have less enthusiasm about brands attempting to engage deeply with cultural expressions. When you look at the global approach, that is probably one of the most essential aspects that brands need to adopt. It's balancing the global brand perception and assets with localized strategies that resonate with specific cultural contexts. So that means that it requires a really deep understanding of the nuance of each market. So a lot of our global brands are hub and spoke models where they define the strategy globally and then deploy it locally. It's that local context that sometimes gets missed because it's in that local context that the connection is made. And so that's one of the most important things that came through in our research. When we looked at the demographics, millennials were probably a key demographic within this report. They're more likely to agree with the four dimensions of loyalty more than any other generation. This suggests that millennials are a key target audience for brands seeking to build a very long-lasting relationship with their customers around shared values, the personal growth, cultural alignment, and community belonging. Gen Z is different than expected. Despite the common assumption that Gen Z expects the most affinity from their brands' relationships, the research found that they don't value the four dimensions of loyalty as much as millennials. Gen Z does value exclusive and early access, but not at a rate higher than millennials. So I think sometimes we confuse or maybe even assume certain things about these demographics. Urbanacity, it's a weird word. The report indicates that urban residents are more likely to have a broad agreement with principal potential cultural community. This suggests that brands targeting urban consumers should emphasize these dimensions in their loyalty strategies, and this all totally makes sense. Suburban environments are going to have very different needs. This always reminds me a little bit of the Amazon versus Walmart strategy. Amazon dominating the short commute, the sort of the very densely populated environments where Walmart actually owns very strongly the more suburban environments. There's a lack of gender difference. The report found no significant gender difference in the perception of loyalty. And this is very important because it suggests that there is no psychology of loyalty. The psychology of loyalty is actually quite gender neutral. In terms of parents versus non-parents, parents tend to align more closely with the attitudes of millennials, likely because many millennials are currently in their peak parenting years. So, key areas of focus by industry. We saw some interesting nuances here, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this and the differences between them. From a financial services perspective, the principle came out as one of the most important dimensions of loyalty, which makes sense. Trust and ethical behaviors are critical. Transparency and fees, responsible lending, and data security all are part of that idea of principle. Potential focus is to help customers achieve financial goals, to secure their future, offering tools and resources for financial planning and management in a clear and relatable way. Community is much less important when it comes to this sector. So don't overinvest in community building initiatives. I think that this makes sense. Financials tends to be a very personal and very familial aspect of our lives. When you look at technology, data and privacy uh, are very high on their care. Transparency and control over personal data are essential. Innovation and empowerment, offering cutting-edge solutions that empower users to achieve more, and a cultural fit. Be part of the culture. Don't try to lead it. I think in terms of technology, in certain parts of the world, we're seeing big backlashes because of this. Retail, we see principle and values in alignment. Consumers want to see ethically sourced retail, fair labor practices, and community support. Brand experience and differentiation that creates a positive and memorable shopping experience. These are the kinds of things that are going to start to set you apart. And then finally, consistency and recognition. Rewarding consistency in customers makes them feel valuable. And this comes out in many of the programs that we manage and we work with. Is we spend a lot of time trying to acquire consumers into the program as opposed to actually valuing and rewarding customers that have been with us for a long time. So it's this thing that Claire mentioned at the beginning, the value of acquiring versus maintaining. Travel and transportation. Principle is in sustainability, emphasize environmental responsibility, ethical tourism, and fair treatment of employees. Seamless and enriching experiences, focusing on making travel easier, more enjoyable, with opportunities for exploration and discovery. And community, which is around showing travel and transportation. Customers may view community building and the fostering of social connections as important. Travel and transportation and entertainment, this in the next category, were the highest in the scores for all four dimensions. And it makes sense. These two categories spend a lot of time making sure that they're adding quite an enriching experience to their products and services. And finally, accommodations and entertainment specifically, this sector sees relatively high scores around all four dimensions, indicating that if you're really going to, if you're in this sector, you really need to look for a holistic approach. By combining the foundational four bonds of loyalty with the motivators of the four dimensions of loyalty, we provide a clear, actionable framework for building really meaningful relationships that drive lasting consumer commitment. Trust is at an all-time low across all spectrums. Choices are endless. Consumers are demanding more than just rewards or even points. This research reveals how brands can cultivate loyalty rooted in shared values, personal growth, cultural alignment, and belonging to your community. If you're looking for a way to succeed in today's competitive landscape, the loyalty blueprint is not just a roadmap, it's a key to unlocking sustainable, emotional, and resonant loyalty. And with that, I want to introduce a wonderful panel. Of course, you've heard at the top from Clare. Clare Lawson is the global president of Ogilvy One. Ogilvy One, if you don't know, focuses on designing valuable relationships between brands and consumers, and importantly, raising the creative agenda in the customer experience industry. With over 20 years of experience in the direct-to-consumer space, Clare has led the CX efforts of many leading global and UK-based consumers and B2B brands, from BT, British Gas, and British Airways to Intercontinental Hotel Group, Formula One, and IBM. My name is Dayoan Daumont. I'm head of strategy for Ogilvy One in EMEA, and I've been with Ogilvy for far longer than I'd like to admit. And I've also been working in consumer experience, loyalty, and direct-to-consumer engagements for about 20 years as well, with very many of the clients that Claire listed, as well as American Express, Lego, and FIFA. Dan Bennett, he's the global lead of behavioral science at Ogilvy Consulting. They're leading the charge in applying behavioral science to real-world challenges. Dan is the global lead of the behavioral science group at Ogilvy Consulting, helping over 100 major brands achieve tangible results. He's also the curator of Nudge Talk, the world's largest behavioral science festival, and it's in its 13th year, and it's again coming back this year on the 27th of June in London. You can register both to attend in person and to attend virtually. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic festival. Charlie Hills, we're really happy that she's joining us. She's Chief Strategy Officer of Mando Connect. It's a WP company focused on loyalty, promotions, partnerships, and reward. She is also a host for the world's biggest loyalty podcast, and we have no shame in saying that here. So let's talk loyalty, and author of the white paper series, What the Brits Want from Loyalty, and Understanding Loyalty in Europe, and an editor at large for The Wise Marketer. Michelle Wildenar, Michelle, I totally messed that up. She leads the strategic services team at the LASIK Group, guiding clients on their loyalty and customer engagement strategies. The LASIK Group is Ogilvy One's global loyalty practice, led from North America. In prior roles, Michelle led strategic marketing at Thomson Reuters, membership marketing at Denmark, a catalog company, and partnership marketing at Northwest Airlines, now Delta. And finally, but not least, we have our very special guest, Bradley Brewer. He is the Vice President of Loyalty, CRM, and Customer Analytics at PetSmart, North America's leading pet retailer. In his role, he leads the Treats Rewards program, an award-winning loyalty program that focuses on delivering value, access, and experiences to pet partners. PetSmart's customers relations management platform and the company's customer analytics team, which leverages data of over 75 million pet parents to power personalized and relevant communications across all marketing channels. I love the whole pet parents thing. It's lovely. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so everyone can see all our guests at once. There they are. We do have some prepared questions, so I'm just going to start throwing them out. And if conversation leads us a certain way, we'll go that way. If not, we'll stay on track. So with that, and please do put your questions in the Q&A. We'll be coming back to those hopefully a few minutes before the hour. So, Michelle, consumers have expressed wanting brands to invest in their growth. Beyond simply providing a product or service, what are some innovative and perhaps unexpected ways brands can foster a sense of potential and help customers achieve their aspiration?
Well, before answering that, one thing I'd like to mention is that the 4 dimensions of loyalty are really personal. And that I think is really interesting. But it also means that brands need to understand their customers to be able to deliver on that. So what are the customers looking for? What is important to them for their potential, for their growth? And then how can the brand deliver on that? And a lot of times the brand can deliver on their own, but they can also deliver through partnerships too. So we've seen both of those strategies. I'd offer 2 brand examples that I think are really good at it. One is the North Face, and the North Face is all about, getting people outside, exploring the outdoors, and really challenging oneself to adventure and things that perhaps they, didn't think that they could do or that they had always had on their bucket list and really wanted to achieve. Obviously, they have the products that help the individual do that. But I think besides the products, they have personal challenges, they have local runs, they have local hikes, they have communities of individuals that you can join with. And that is a great example to me of helping individuals achieve their potential. Another brand that I personally really like is Marriott International. Obviously, a big brand, very powerful brand, and one that delivers across loyalty so well. But from a personal standpoint, one of the reasons I like it is they help members and me discover the world and broaden our understanding and appreciation of others. And they do this in so many ways. Of course, they have their amazing hotel properties across the world, but they have some more tactical ways as well, like the curated travel experiences, their Moments platform. They have travel guides and different workshops and destination information. So those are a little bit more tactical, but again, they help individuals kind of broaden their perspective, experience the world, and achieve that personal growth. So a couple examples there.
Yeah, no, those are great, and it definitely shows the effort that those brands have gone to demonstrate the full potential of the consumer. Bradley, from a pet care's perspective, can you share any specific examples of how the brand has gone beyond selling products to empower consumers and demonstrate that tangible commitment to their lives and their pets?
Yeah, I mean, when we relaunched our program, Treats Rewards, last year, it's just come up, I guess, a year ago that we did this. It was a big part of what we were trying to do because we had mastered the ability to give people points and to give them great deals and savings, and consumers really appreciate that. But we wanted to take it even to that next level of bringing more of that emotional loyalty to the forefront in the program. So, for example, we host sweepstakes every single month, and we've given away things like Super Bowl tickets. We've given away five-day stays at a Hilton pet-friendly property. We've given away millions of points. We've let people give away points to our charities, all in the idea of connecting with consumers at moments that really matter throughout their life cycle. As Michelle mentioned, we've really leaned into partnerships to help facilitate this. So again, partnerships with companies like Hilton, Shutterfly to make beautiful photo books. Consumers, generally speaking, have more photos of their pets than they do of their kids or their significant other on their phone. And so we've partnered with these brands that also have a great deal of enthusiasm for pets. 1-800-Flowers is another one. And then we've really tried to line these partnerships up to sort of these moments that matter. So whether it be a birthday or a gotcha day, really being able to help give you a gift that lets you celebrate that moment. And again, the whole point and our goal of the program is to have a really strong foundation of the commercial elements of deals and savings and points, but really take it to that next level so that we're in that moment of joy and that we're part of the joy of life with pets, because it's such an emotional, joyful category to be a part of. That's what we really aspire to every day with our new program, and going forward, we're going to really continue to lean into it even more in the future.
Is there a way, and just to because you brought something up that was kind of interesting in the type of examples you were listing, is there a way that how did you select where you should push into, which moments in culture and which moments of community should you push into?
Well, we spend a lot of time talking to our stores and our associates and our customers. So the thing that's really unique about PetSmart is that we have 50,000 pet obsessed associates. And so when you have this common bond between the pet parent and the associate in the store, it's really easy to understand the moments that matter. And what you'll find is in pets, your pet's birthday and your pet's gotcha day are really important things. But people really also follow all the seasonal holidays, right? So Halloween is a big moment for pets. The holidays in December are also big moments. And so we just sort of, and we see it every day, right? People are coming in, one of the things that we try to line is our grooming business, right? Where you can have your dog's haircut, bath, all of these things, aligning that with the moments that really matter. So again, looking good for your birthday or for a Halloween parade, there's so many things that we really sort of tap into as part of that.
I do remember that Halloween, the doggy parade in Tompkins Square Park in New York City is one of my favorites. So and I think you touched upon something that Michelle also mentioned, which is this obsession with knowing your customers. I think if you don't start there, you're never going to be able to connect with them, even if you use this framework. I think you've laddered in nicely into the culture dimension. Charlie, let's diving into the culture dimension of it. The research highlights that the delicate balance between reflecting and leading culture. In your experience, what are the key considerations for brands navigating this tension, and what are the potential pitfalls of misrepresenting or misinterpreting cultural values?
It's a really good question, although now all I can think about, Bradley, is my gorgeous pug, Edna, who's a celebrity on the loyalty circuit as well. She does a really good lecture with me on the British loyalty landscape. So yeah, I'm imagining how Edna would answer this question now. I think it's a brilliant question because it's such a fine balance. You know, in the research, I'm sure you're all downloading it. I can see in the comments that lots of people are challenging. Good luck, keep going. It's well worth a download and a read. But what really struck out to me is that tension is very real. So you've got 79% agreeing with a brand's got to chart its own path, and then 74% also wanting you to be part of culture. And I think that's probably something that we struggle with on all the brands that we work with, whether we're choosing a moment like PetSmart and actually trying to be part of, you know, the Christmas experience of you with your dog or your cat, or whether actually you're thinking about those bigger, grittier kind of cultural issues that we're all faced with at the moment. And I think it's a tension that's very real. When I sat back to think about that question, I was like, actually, it is a tension, it's real, but I think the starting point has to be who you are as a brand and actually what matters to you, and crafting that in a unique and authentic way that actually fits with your brand and fits with the products and talks with the kind of things that Michelle was talking about with Marriott. It would be no good if Marriott, one of my favorites, you know, Bonvoy, one of the best programs in the world and biggest programs in the world, if they suddenly went off and did something that wasn't about making people travel the world and be a brilliant guest everywhere. So I think that has to be the starting point, which is having a really clear understanding of who you are and who you stand for, and then understanding where you sit on that spectrum actually, and should you be staying true to your own values and crafting your own path at 79%, or should you be trying to be popular? My answer would always be true to yourself. I'm very clear where we sit with our clients. We're very much more in chart your own path in an appropriate way. And then I think some of the other considerations is having a deep understanding of your audience and your role in their life. I think sometimes as marketeers, we can forget where our role is. And actually, it's really important that we understand where we have a place to talk and where we don't. Timing and relevance was my number 3. I think that's really key. You've got to sit back, reflect, and understand when is the right moment to have those conversations and be part of it. And then most importantly, I think it's really critical that your internal business culture reflects your values. I think there are some fantastic examples of brands out there in the world. And we work with lots of amazing clients. You know, we don't work with them. We'd love to, but Patagonia is always held up as the kind of global exemplar of, you know, walking the talk. And I think that's a really, really good example. One of the brands that we've worked with for a long time, Lidl, you know, really always laser focused on customer value. I think that's a really interesting thing, and delivering that in every touch point. So making sure that your internal culture reflects your external. And then I think you probably don't need me to talk about the pitfalls, because I'm sure we're all aware of them. And there are some brilliant ones kind of listed out in the paper as well. It's one of the things I really love in the research, actually. You talk about the exemplars, but also the cautionary tales. I think, you know, you've got to be really careful about woke and greenwashing. You've got to be really careful about alienating your core audience. Everybody knows the case study I'm talking about there. Be really, really careful. You've also got to be really careful about oversimplifying complex issues that perhaps you might feel you understand, but perhaps you don't. And then lastly, I think the ultimate pitfall is that if you get it wrong, you can lose your audiences, lose the loyalty, and you can lose it really quickly. It was that previous Ogilvy research, wasn't it, that said 44% of consumers will sever ties completely with a brand after one really bad experience. So that's probably the biggest pitfall of them all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. That's incredibly thorough. I think the only thing we have missing from that answer is the perspective of a behavioral scientist, but we just happen to have one in this panel. So how can brands leverage cultural insights, Dan, to create more personal, relevant, and emotionally resonant experiences for their target audience? And also, you know, like with everything that Charlie says, you imagine your ethical considerations, avoiding cultural appropriation. I imagine that's a balancing act that we've had to do before.
Always a balancing act. And I think a lot of this is about making sure we've got that brand and person fit. And the more that we understand about the consumer and the more we define our brand, the better we can make that fit. It's when we get a bit lazy about either of those two things, can we fall into some of those pitfalls. So to leverage a cultural insight, you need to have cultural insight. So the first step is getting them. Far too many brands have rudimentary research techniques to understand customers. As a behavioral scientist, my whole world is built upon the fact that people don't have access to the parts of their brains that are making decisions. 95% of our brain is a subconscious machine that we don't have access to. We live in this 5% of our brain at the beginning, at the front of our brains, and we just don't know what's happening in this big subconscious back there. So when we're asking people what their preferences are, what they'd like to see from us, they literally cannot always tell us without the right prompting, because they're living in this kind of 5% conscious part of their brain. And so how do you get to that? Well, no method is perfect. People always ask, what is the right way to kind of really understand customers? And the fact is, it has to be a diversity of inputs. It has to be mixed methods. Social listening is not your answer. It's one of your answers. So we've got to always get that balance right. And it sounds really basic, but it's surprising how often we see this incorrect. Getting that balance of qualitative data to understand all the potentials it can be, and that quantitative data to select which of the elements we should be focusing on. Once we get a mixed methods input to really understand the customer, we can get a much better fit. The report really cleverly focuses on psychographics as much as it does demographics, because as we've all seen, if we've lived in the world over the past 10 years and seen all of our kind of political changes that we've seen, that understanding people on demographics isn't enough. Understanding someone's gender, someone's age, someone's race is a great starting point, but it doesn't tell you everything about them. And brands can make big pitfall mistakes, as Charlie alluded to, by not understanding the how people think. So psychographics like conscientiousness, how diligent is your customer? Does that match how you communicate? How open to new experiences are they? Open to new experiences is the only dimension that kind of falls off after about 60 years old. You start to become much less open to new experiences after then. So looking at how your customers think and whether you have a mindset match is just as important as making sure that you match customers in terms of demographics and how you behave. So making sure that we really understand the customer, making sure that we really define who our brand is. Once we can get those matches right, we could be much more influential with them. And that's how you build loyalty, because you're understanding what we call the real why. So not just what customers do, but why they do it and why they think it. When we know that, we can build much better experiences for them.
I like that because it ladders into every one of the dimensions, right? Because at the end of the day, culture is part of your identity, is part of who you are, your values, and when we get to know a consumer in that way, in those dimensions, we get a lot of answers that fit into the 4 dimensions. Jumping into principle, because I think that we were touching upon that just now. Charlie, what are the most effective ways for brands to communicate their core values to consumers in a clear, compelling, and authentic way? And how can we ensure that this messaging resonates with the target audience?
Yeah, if we had the answer to that, it'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? I think if it was a one-size-fits-all for every brand, we'd all be out of a job. I think the first thing is to figure out what those values are, exactly as Dan has said. We've been privileged. We work with the behavioral science team loads. I highly recommend their mixed methodologies. It's terrifying. Coming from a sort of traditional research background, it scared the hell out of me the first time we sort of asked 6 people their opinion and made a campaign off the back of it. But it's brilliant. And I think that balance and that mixed input is, I'm an absolute convert. I think when you then start to think about and translate that into execution, we do a lot of work in brand partnerships, and execution is the meat of what we do. And I think I was trying to think of my top 3, and I think my top 3 responses to this is consistency. It talks a little bit back to what I was talking about before. You've got to have a consistent message, but it's not just a marketing message. Your front of sales staff need to have it. I can see Bradley kind of nodding. Your internal culture needs to have it. Your customer services center needs to have it. In my world, you need to make sure that your brand partnerships have it. It's got to be every touch point consistently across, so that when your consumer leaves that experience, they feel that value that's come through. The second one for me is simplicity. I think this is something we've really noticed. I've been doing this 20 years, and a number of times I've said consumers are bombarded by thousands of messages every day, followed up by, it's so much more expensive to get a new customer than it is to keep an existing one. But I think simplicity is really key, simplicity and repetition, so that consumers really get the message. They have so much from every single brand interaction and every single interaction on their phone. I think that's really critical. And then number three, I think, is something that a lot of people forget. I think sometimes we see a values positioning and a corporate social responsibility positioning, sometimes separately to our consumer messaging, or in some of the brands we work with, we might have trade messaging that operates separately to brand messaging or loyalty messaging. And I think it's really key in our communications that we share with our consumers a demonstration of what our values are and actually what we're doing about them. And we remember to include that as part of our messaging as well. It's sort of an evolution of the proof point. It's really key that we tell people what we're doing as well as just talk about it. A couple of really good British examples. I know we've got a really global audience today, but one that's really stood out to me is O2 Priority, really clear. You know, everything we do, our customer will be a priority, reflected in every touch point you have with the brand. I quite like Sky as well within the loyalty program, VIP. They've actually made that for every single customer, and actually they're trying really hard to make every single one of their existing customers feel really special to them, and the longer you stay, the better it gets. And then Lidl is probably the best one, I think, for repetition and simplicity. You know, big savings, no plus, Lidl plus, as part of their kind of classic overall Lidl comms architecture. Those are just three that really stand out to me as people who are getting their values right. And it's not always the sexiest values. You know, Lidl is all about giving customers value, but that in itself is a really compelling value that consumers are really connecting with.
It made me think a little bit when you were saying that. Rory Sutherland, who's the co-founder of our behavioral science practice, he has a saying that goes that one of the best markers of a company's customer obsession is if their call centers are allowed to call their customers and not just the other way around. I thought, yeah, I always thought that was an interesting point of view. Dan, in terms of brands living out their values, how can brands authentically demonstrate this alignment through their actions? What frameworks or strategies do we employ for consistency?
So I think the key word that you said there is authenticity. And you know, living out your values isn't a luxury for brands. It really is the table stakes, because customers never see your brand value documents. They only see what you do. And so actually actioning them and actually living them and doing that consistently over time is really essential. You know, we, all of us on the call and all of us dialing in, have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to spot inauthenticity. It's been very key. You know, humans need to be part of groups, and then they need to be able to operate within them. And part of operating within them is understanding who's faking and who's not faking. That's how you can decide who to live with, who to trust, all those very kind of core human things. So as people, we're very good at it. So as brands, we have to be very consistent in like showing who we are. And talk is cheap. We need to think about actions over messages, because messages are kind of instant things that we say, and actions are what build it over time. And that's why people have a feeling about whether something's kind of true and authentic and living out its values or not, rather than a rational assessment, because it builds up over time without the customer even really knowing it. And I think people who get the consistency really well, I mean, Ben and Jerry's, for me, are the poster child for this. Kind of, they have a real strategy of long-term commitment and consistency to sustainable and causes. You know, they've taken public stances. They're very good at activism and kind of really pointing the finger. They support community initiatives, and then they tell people about doing that. So many brands do great things and forget to say it. Some brands say it and forget to do it. But you know, the key is to do both of those things kind of equally well. Make sure they're doing kind of rigorous and transparent sourcing of ingredients. They don't fake it. You know, faking it is what some customers think brands do. Let's remember that brand trust isn't always there in every market around the world. They give us undeniable evidence over time that they're doing the right thing. And that generates quite the relationship, that generates quite the loyalty, and that generates quite the return. There's another great restaurant rather, is Oaxaca, the UK Mexican chain. They deeply care about doing the right thing. Their head of marketing, Ed, is a wealth of knowledge on sustainability. You know, he could have kind of 10 PhDs in it in my mind. Like, they really know their stuff. They were founded in 2007, and that deep commitment is not thrown in your face. They, like I talked earlier about the brand and the consumer fit. They talk about their sustainability initiatives as much as anybody would care, which is, not all of consumers all around the world are deeply radical about shouting about it all the time. So they do a lot of things by stealth. So they'll design their menu very cleverly to nudge people to meatless choices. So as the customer, you don't really know that you're ordering more vegetarian food than you ordinarily would do. But the menu's just designed in such a clever way that the great choices that just feel right are the sustainable choices. You would barely even notice. They have tried things in the past, putting the amount of carbon on each of the dishes. It didn't really change behavior because that's just not how people think about calories and taste. They don't think about carbon. So they really learned to kind of do what they care about, live their brand values, but then communicate them in a way that's really accessible to the customer and matches them. They add lots of other great things in too. You might not know, but you can, if you're in London and you're at Oaxaca or in the UK, you can ask the waiter to roll a lime. They'll bring a dice over, and if the dice rolls a 6, then you will get a free drink. They have lots of these playful Mexican culture pieces that really add up to doing the right thing, to having it sustainable, to live in their sustainable brand values without thrusting it down your throat while you're just trying to have a nice time. So I think that's, for me, is a great example of consistency over time, but also kind of doing it in a way that really fits the consumer.
I like that the principle, almost like the consumer has a nose for it. Bradley, see what I did? In terms of community, now our last subject, Michelle, I wanted to ask you, in today's digital age, how can brands cultivate that genuine and thriving sense of community amongst their consumers? It's been really hard to do in these programs. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
And I'm not surprised that community shows up a little bit lower in the research because it almost always does. But I think community can be really effective if the brand can get it right. What I think makes a community successful is when it's organic, when customers are connecting with each other. And the brand has a role. The brand can create the community platform. They can encourage participation. They can make sure it's a safe environment. But ultimately, it has to be meaningful for the customer. They have to find other individuals that they want to engage with. And that's what makes it work. I would say that I had a bit of a learning experience, maybe about 10 years ago or so. I created, along with my team, of course, a community for small law firms. And it ultimately worked, but it took a lot of work. And one of the things that we learned along the way is that small law firms, they're literally firms with maybe 1 or 2 attorneys. They were very hesitant to ask questions because it made them feel like they maybe didn't know their business as well as they should. And they also were a little concerned about providing advice to others because it would be, written down in the community. So we learned that, and we found ways of creating what we did is we would, for instance, connect lawyers with each other through the community, but then they would take it offline, as an example. So it's just really important to understand how that safe environment can be created. I would say that, some of the well-known communities, I'm sure everyone expects this brand to come up because it always does, but Sephora, their beauty insider community, very successful. It's fun. It is member driven, and, it's very visual, just very supportive, reinforcing of all the individuals that participate. We also have worked with Gap Inc. and Athleta, and they have a really nice online community called Athleta Well. And that is all about empowering girls and women. So very clear on their priority, all of their content, all of their events, all of their experiences support that. And that is definitely something that, people can get their head around, their arms, their hearts around, and it has worked very well for them.
Hey, Dayoan's going to hate me for this, Michelle, because I'm going rogue now, and I'm just your point around the small law firms actually was sort of sways into one of the questions in the Q&A, which was, how does some of these principles apply to B2B? One of the things I was going to chime in on that when we got to that question is that I think all the principles do apply, but perhaps some of the engagement in the B2B space we should expect to be more covert rather than overt, because people don't necessarily want to be sharing their competitive advantage. I would love, with your experience, any other points that you would have with regard to, if anything does really differ, or what things do differ in the B2B environment.
Sure. I would say maybe some similarities and some differences. The similarity, of course, B2B, especially smaller B2B, we all as individuals still are consumers, and we often operate as consumers in terms of values and things like that. What is valuable to us? But also B2B does have some unique needs, and it really depends on the industry or the business that they're in. So if, thinking of experiences or engagements or benefits, make sure it works with your audience, and the confidentiality, as an example, when I was in the legal space, know your audience, know what will create a safe experience for them and what they might need. It could be reporting, it could be learned experiences with other businesses so they can grow their business more successfully. So find what is similar to consumer and find what is different and deliver on both.
That's great. I think, Bradley, you mentioned in your previous answer as well, you were talking about some of the efforts that you guys were doing within the program that was to foster that community. What else are you doing to foster that? But more importantly, how measurable is that impact of fostering that community to your customer loyalty and advocacy within the pet parents?
Yeah. Maybe to draw on something Michelle said, early in my career, I worked on Nike's run clubs. And, what you really find in community is that you get it started, you facilitate it a little bit along the way, but the community then really takes hold and owns it. And again, the brand has a key role in making those connections happen. But for that authenticity, for that to really feel like a community, it really has to sort of take off within the community and let them sort of own it in many ways. At PetSmart, what bonds our community together is really the love of pets, the joy that pets bring to our lives. And so one of the big areas that we focused on building our community is really around PetSmart Charities, which is, many people don't know this, but PetSmart Charities is the largest donor to animal welfare in North America. And so, for example, when you're part of our loyalty program, you get double your points when you make a donation to our charity. Last month, we have 3 tiers in our loyalty program, the top tier being very important pet parent. Usually you have to spend $1,000 to get there. Last month, we said, hey, if you come in, participate in what is our National Adoption Week, where we bring in our customers to our store and they can adopt pets. If you adopt a pet, we're going to give you that very top tier of status. As part of an acknowledgement that we value other things in our community versus just spending money to sort of achieve a status. We also let customers participate by donating their points. And so for us, in some ways, we're just getting started, right? We're just getting started and we're anchoring in some of our values. We've been adopting pets out of our stores since the very beginning, over 11 million. And when you talk to customers who've gone through that experience, they really feel like they're part of something bigger. And I think we still have tons of runway to tap into that even further as we build and facilitate our community. It's something that's sort of, never done, never finished, so to speak.
And especially because I think pet ownership has a natural connection in our minds to people who care about animals in general. So there is this idea, not just pet care, but it's pet or it's animal well-being, and that translates into natural resources and natural environment. So I think that there's a lot of stretch and there's a lot of room there in terms of defining the community within that sector, for sure.
The other thing that I remember from our PetSmart work, and I really liked it a lot, is that pet parenting isn't always perfect. It's wonderful, but your dog might come in and they've just played in the mud and they're really dirty or whatever. So just kind of allowing pet parents to understand that they're part of a community of the amazing experiences with pets, and maybe some of the things that are either challenging or just funny or whatever, just being real. And I think there's a bit of a community around that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Claire, you can always, but I didn't ever a time when I would be upset about that. But now it's your time to shine. We have some questions that we want from the audience to try to take, and feel free, panel, to speak up if you want to add anything to the answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thanks everyone so far. I've been Emma and I have been monitoring the questions as we've been going along, and as I imagined at the beginning of this, we have got way too many to get into. So I've just picked a few choice ones, and then, as I said, we will look to revert directly back to those of you who've asked some quite far-reaching questions, actually, really good ones. One I wanted to start with is, and this came through as a bit of a theme of a number of questions, is, are technology and tech tools like automation, AI, hurting brands and corporations' ability to build loyalty with customers? And if so, why? Charlie, maybe I'll come to you on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm a big fan and a huge experimenter of all the cool things that we can now do that we couldn't do. And I think a lot of the things we imagined being able to create, I can see Michelle nodding, 5-10 years ago in the loyalty and engagement space, we can now do. So I think if you understand the capabilities and you get the consumer and brand audience right, then actually technology and its development is really, really exciting. And I think if you do it that way round, you can be really successful. Where I think people can trip up is if they do it the other way around, which we see a lot in the loyalty space, which is, oh, my platform's got a new feature, it can do this, let's roll it out, without a clear understanding of actually how that builds loyalty or works across one of the bonds or the dimensions of loyalty that we've been talking today. But I think if you've got your objective, your brand, your mindset match, I think Dan called it, if your mindset match is right and technology can enable you to achieve that, then that's great. And I also think we should all be experimenting carefully at the moment with it and seeing what we can do, because the ideas can come from anywhere. And actually a brilliant platform development or a brilliant technological capability development might spark a really cool new idea for an amazing new innovation in the PetSmart program that we could never have come up with before. So I'm a big fan of it, but also quite cautious, and also check it very carefully with your legal teams, your IT teams, your ops teams, your budget teams, your FD, and everybody else that you need to check these kind of new experiments with. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
No, it's right. And actually, there's quite a lot, as you were talking in the chat, there was a lot of people agreeing with the point that was raised earlier, that simplicity is key. And I think we would always say, absolutely use the tools. But if it feels like it's adding complexity, it's going to take away from your brand experience. So I think that whole kind of simplicity piece also kind of plays in there.
And I think the coffee shop sector, and I talk a lot about restaurants, is one of these huge new sectors that's exploded across Europe in terms of loyalty and engagement programs as part of a bigger loyalty drive. They're really nailing that. So I really recommend checking out that sector for how they're using technology to make the experience better. They started off just making it easier, removing pain points, but actually there's some really brilliant stuff happening now that's really improving the customer experience.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, Charlie. Now, one I really did love, because I thought it played to a number of industries, although the person who's questioned it has spoken about education, is what's our take on building long-term cross-generational brand loyalty in sectors such as education, where parents, their children, and potentially even their grandchildren remain loyal to the same institution across generations? I think, Michelle, you gave that one a thumbs up, so I'm going to come to you if that's okay. Give me your point of view.
Absolutely. And I think it does apply across industries. What I would say is that nostalgia is a current trend for sure, 2025 trend, and probably will continue for some time. And that can be leveraged. Part of the reason for this is that younger generations, frankly, are not having as easy of a time, perhaps, as some of the other generations. So they're wanting those sorts of experiences, even though they've had some challenges. What we do need to remember, though, is that nostalgia needs to be made current. So, take what that special memory is and do something culturally relevant with it. And I think one of the interesting examples, kind of a fun example, you probably have all seen it on social, but, think of the family photo space. And there has been quite the craze of, recreate the family photo in kind of the corny pose, but do it in a fun way. It has actually kind of opened up and brought life to some of the portrait studios that were really suffering. But it's a great example of leveraging a positive memory, but doing something fun and current. And that's how you can pull the, the business and those memories through generations.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Michelle. And last one in 60 seconds, I couldn't not finish on this since it's such a passion of ours. What are our thoughts on creativity overload and where almost everyone seems to be having fun at the expense of being true to their brand? So what is the role of creativity in loyalty? Now, I would be a very honest and kind of straightforward in saying, creativity for us is more than the fun piece. It's about being true to the brand and showing the brand in its best light in the right way. I'm not going to root this at anybody in particular, whoever would like to answer it, but the role of creativity in loyalty.
Well, I would agree with you. It has to align with the brand. And there are so many opportunities for creativity with the brand. So that's where we start for sure. We believe the magic sits within the brand, and then it comes to life in lots of creative ways.
Yeah, we think a lot about, transactional loyalty and emotional loyalty. And I think that when you really are trying to maximize that emotional loyalty that could span generations, for example, that's where the magic and creativity comes in and is very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Creativity is the power of emotion, right? So that is absolutely the core. Thank you, Bradley. And thank you so much to everybody on our panel and to Dayoan and the team who have worked tirelessly to put the research together. We will follow up with anybody in the chat who may have had a problem, hopefully not too many of you now, in terms of downloading the report. It is extensive. We will be very honest with you. It's quite a read, but we hope that there is a lot of learning, a lot of statistics and value that you can use. And if we can be of any help, please reach out directly through the function on the website. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the emojis and the heart. So it warms our day. And for those of you on the west side of the world, enjoy the rest of your day. And for the rest of you, thank you for joining us.